Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder, Richard Case, and co-host and retreat leader, Trish Harrington. Today is our special guest day, where we will hear from a friend in the ministry who will share their insight and stories on truth in this chaotic world. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is Guest Thursday, and this will be a very interesting time because generally the guests that come on are part of our ministry and they share things that are happening in the ministry. And because of what Denny and I have been doing with End Times, and we've talked about the culture issue of today, that we're pretty lousy, all of us, at listening to each other. Denny said, well, he's got a relationship with his brother Jonathan, and they don't agree on stuff, but they have a beautiful way of conversing. So Denny, I'm going to hand it over to you. Why don't you introduce Jonathan, and then you can kind of take it from there, and I'll just chime in.
Thanks, Rich. So you're going to hear from my cousin, my first cousin, Jonathan.
Sorry.
Our fathers were brothers, and that's how we know each other. We grew up really very close as a family, although we lived in different cities, but it was driving distance apart. So one of the great memories of my childhood was my parents loading us all up in a station wagon, and we driving to Milwaukee and spending a week with Jonathan and his older brother and sister and my uncle and aunt, or they would come and visit us. And it was a regular
So you would go between Milwaukee and St. Louis?
And St. Louis, yeah.
Okay.
And it was a real special time of life. You'll hear a bit, we lived very, very different lives, even as kids. But, and so our families had very different dynamics in almost every way, but it was a very fun part of our childhood. What this is really about, Rich, that has been a surprise for me and really a wonderful surprise in my life, is reconnecting with Jonathan. He and I would find each other every 10 years. And it's almost like we'd pick up over a coffee whatever sentence we ended the last time we talked 10 years earlier. It was one of those. Again, we grew up, had very different careers. He's a professional. He's got an Ivy League education, lives in a very different kind of environment than I do. We both grew up Jewish. As you know, I'm a Christian Jew today. Jonathan is not. He'll tell you about that. But much more recently, and I won't spoil it because I'm going to let Jonathan introduce how this happened once I turn it over to him. But that's sort of the background. And this is a pleasant, wonderful surprise. What we've learned to do is something that I can't do in any other environment, but I'm trying to translate this. And I think there's great lessons for all of us. So with that, Jonathan, I'm going to introduce you and maybe you can talk a bit about, where I left off.
I've got a couple questions. First, Jonathan, Denny said you went Ivy League, and tell us, what school did you go to? What are you doing now? And then where do you live? Just to set the context for it, and then Denny can go further with that.
So I joke that I'm covered in Ivy. I went to Harvard undergraduate and Yale Medical School, and I worked for 40 years as a psychiatrist and have been retired for about 4 years now, happily retired. And so in Milwaukee, my dad was a rabbi, a Reformed Jewish rabbi. And so my household was a kind of a serious and academic household. And the driving force really was social justice in a religious Jewish context. And I towed the line. I wasn't a kid who rebelled. I was a kid who was a good kid and wanted to get a good education. And I was born in Boston, and so I came back to Boston. And the reason I went into psychiatry was because I wanted to understand why people thought and felt and behaved the way they did. I can say now after 40 years, I'm more confused than ever, but I know a lot more.
You mean you haven't figured it out yet?
Oh my God, just the opposite.
Yeah.
And so when Denny would come to town on business, we would have coffee and we would talk. And he, in Massachusetts, we refer to ourselves and people refer to us as the People's Republic of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
When Donald Trump was first elected, my friends didn't know anybody who voted Republican, maybe 2 people. And I remember talking to a friend whose brother was in Atlanta who didn't know a single person who voted Democratic. And I'm interested. And I had to overcome that people who voted for Donald Trump and Republicans weren't stupid, and they weren't crazy, and they weren't ignorant, but it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I really had nobody to talk to about it because the people that I read, the people that I talked to were basically all agreeing. And I joke, I find myself very reasonable, and I always agree with myself. But then, so Denny comes along. So I have to respect Denny because I know him and because of his accomplishments and because of what he's done in his life. And so it was not just a quickness to dismiss him, but an opportunity to find out, why does he think what he's thinking and where's it coming from and how do we understand it? And part of what enabled us to do this, I think, is because, well, first of all, we love each other. And that really helps. And I would say the first thing to have a good discussion is if you can love the other person to start with, that really helps.
Let's stop just for a second right there. How are you both defining that when you say you love each other? How do you define that?
I take him seriously.
And I do believe it kind of sets the stage of, because of that feeling and that truth about it, it allows you to have open dialogue. But how would you both define that?
Well, for me, is if he was in trouble, I would help him. I care about what happens to him. I take what he says seriously. I think that there's just a goodwill feeling that I get that emanates from him and that I feel toward him. So that's a quick answer. Denny, what would you say?
I think because we have a big family on both sides of my family. I have lots of cousins. I don't have a relationship like I have with Jonathan. And it's so interesting because there's other people that certainly growing up I saw much more often. I think what it was is that even as a kid, I remember late at night, Jonathan and I, in the same bedroom and talking, basically talking and joking about stuff. And I thought it was the most serious home I'd ever been in. Our house was not a serious home like that, but there were all kinds of unsaid and unspoken things. And when I was together with him, there was this idea that everything was just okay and fun, even though we were different. So I think for me, it was just always a special relationship. And then it was so amazing that we would catch up with each other on these infrequent occasions. And there would be almost an endearing, the instant we were together, there was an endearing feeling that I had. And so I think that's how I would characterize it.
Yeah. That's good. Okay, fantastic. Well, go ahead, Jonathan. Keep going.
So the first thing I think that we try to talk about is when we talk about politics, and we talk a lot about politics, is what are the goals? What are the goals? And we agree on a lot of the goals. And, to kind of tick some off, it's like we agree on we need an immigration policy. We need national security. We need people's voices to speak up. We need honoring authority and history. So the first thing is, what are the goals? And then the things we talk about, well, how do we get there? And what are the strategies and the ways that we want, from our position, that we would reach those goals? And that makes for a lot of interesting conversation. And we talk about, well, what are the upsides, but what also is the collateral downside or the possibility, or how realistic? And what are the consequences when you reach the goals the way you want to do it, the way I suggest doing it? And the premise is that there are people that are really a lot smarter than we are. There are people I say, you should read this, you should read that. But the point isn't that that's going to convince Denny or anybody. It's that we have the discussion between the two of us, and that's what's more important. And it's never scoring points. It's not to be right. And I'm a competitive guy. I love being right. I love winning. But that's not what this is about. This is about how to keep the conversation going and with a sense of respect, confusion, and then inquiring. It's kind of like being a social anthropologist. It's keeping an attitude of interest and curiosity, but not criticism and critiquing and finding where it's wrong. And if there's flawed thinking, we talk about the flawed thinking, and we try to admit it, both of us, that we're both imperfect. We realize that the news that I listen to and the people I read, and the news that Denny listens to and reads, they're really different. They're different facts that are presented. They're different perspectives. And we realize that we both have similar attitudes about the media, how isolating it is, how angering it is, how fear-mongering it is, and that it's not useful. And that we want to have a conversation and not hear people scoring points and always being right and consistent and so utterly different.
Yeah. Let me ask you two questions that you just said. One is, you said you have common goals. Do you, in your conversations, do you talk about those specifically, or is it kind of implied that you both?
No, but one of the things we try to do is, if people talk about, progressive or liberal or conservative, is we try to deconstruct it. We say, let's not talk labels. Let's talk what we actually are referring to and break it down and what we're actually talking about, than using these shortcut labels, because so much of the conversations that you hear are you can print them on a placard, on a sign with 7 words, and it just isn't complex enough to do justice.
Yeah,
So we
so
talk
you're
explicitly about goals, immigration or national security or specifically,
yeah.
sure.
So you're trying to in your goal setting discussion, it's let's not rely on labels. Let's actually work at what we think we understand about it, or what the purpose of it is, and then related to that, you just said that your sources of information. It sounds like you two, and maybe Denny, you could also weigh in here. You're careful about using your sources as the source of your pure argument, because those sources are all distorted by definition, and they're interpreting information in a certain paradigm that if you use that paradigm, you'll never talk about anything. Is that kind of a fair statement about what you do with your sources of information?
I'll jump on this first. Early on, I when we first started this, and we haven't really talked to you, Rich, about how we do this because there's a structure to what we do. But early on, I posited this idea that if Jonathan and I exchanged sources of information, all of them, and if we agreed to do it for 30 days, we would believe differently at the end of 30 days. My beliefs would be more like his beliefs would be more like mine. I don't know if we'd switch sides, but I was making this point that I think we are capped, not just there's biases that are built into our information sources, but the topics themselves are selected based on that. So often Jonathan would say, I know you must be resonating over blank, something that was real current. And I'd say, I don't even know what that is. And he would tell me, and I would say, I don't even hear that on the news. And I would do the same thing. And he'd say, I don't know what you're talking. And so it is, I think we really believe that this source of information is it's entertaining and all that, but if you're going to have a serious dialogue, Jonathan always says to me, I know that's what that said, but I'm interested in what you think, which really challenges me to say, what do I think? Because especially if it's a topic I don't know that much about, but he knows a lot about, because then I got to sort of study up on it. And so that becomes important, the source of information. And also, we can't help it. Now we both do it. We go back and forth to get quickly informed on Grok or AI or one of the others. And so, you can tell when you're getting some of that, but it is useful to put topics and color on the table. But the real issue comes down to, can we get to a place where we can share what we personally think about a topic, even if it's not one that's of interest? I'll often tell Jonathan, I'm not very interested in that topic, right? I'm just not. It's not on my list. And it's like, well, would you be willing to do some work to understand it so that you can share something about it? Okay.
And it boggles my mind
Jonathan.
that it's not of interest to him. It's like the things that are so important to me. He said, well, I haven't really been thinking about that. And that's not my top 3 or 5 topics. And I think, my goodness, like, how can that possibly be? But also, when we ask questions, a lot of times it's not really a question. It's a statement disguised as a question. Like when I say, how can that possibly be? That's like, are you nuts? But it's also really, I really do want to know, how can that possibly be? Because he's not stupid. He's not ignorant. He's very thoughtful. So how can that be? I want to understand that.
Yeah. How do you both, as you're talking about something, and there's a couple of things I want to pursue there, but one, how do you get underneath the slanted, biased information that you would start with? Is that, the sources I'm hearing and processing, here's what you do. It sounds like you work at getting underneath that. How do you do that piece of it?
Denny, what would you say?
There's an assumption. Jonathan has an assumption that if I say, hey, look at this article, and before we get together to talk, we're often sharing information by email or by message with something and indicating that's probably going to be on my list this coming Tuesday or whenever we're getting together. And so Jonathan will have an assumption about what my news sources are, because he can't help it. And I'll have an assumption, if he does the same thing, what his news sources are. And so I'll try and find some other point of view on it if I can. And my immediate reaction, because we're trained to do this, is to try and prove him wrong, or that his source is wrong. I can't help it. I have to move off of that because he and I agree we're not going to do that. But my first reaction is always to disprove, because I don't like the feeling of whatever point of view is that he's raising on something. Because it's because we have different values, and so we're going to bump into each other's value thresholds. And so we do that. So what happens is multiple sources do come out. Like I'll think of one that we had a discussion about, actually, that the current administration will work against judicial norms and legal norms and the sort of the historic rational way decisions are made in the judiciary. This administration will push the limits of that with the intent that it will eventually be pushed to the Supreme Court where they have a few extra votes. And that's how he gets things done. So that's a premise that Jonathan put up at one point. And that this 6-3 Supreme Court is really a problem because this administration uses it. Right? It was a good point. So I said, you know what? And something popped into my head. I wonder how unusual this 6-3 voting record is for this Supreme Court. I got a bunch of data from multiple sources that looked at the last 20 years of Supreme Court decisions, how many decisions they made each of their terms, how many of them were unanimous, what percent were unanimous, 8-1, 7-2, 6-3, on and on. And it was very illuminating to me to do it. And then I shared it with Jonathan. Jonathan, you remember this one, don't you?
Yeah.
And it was illuminating to you too, right?
Yeah. And a friend of mine said that I'm a meta thinker, and I totally identify with that. I think about how people think. And so a lot is like, I'm always confused. As a psychiatrist, I was always confused. And in this world, I'm always confused. And it's not that I don't know anything, but I think about how do people think. And so I think about things like how much are we breaking norms and what effect does this have on people in the country? I think about, the people in my sphere talk about, is this administration doing things that are unconstitutional? And what's the effect of either that they are or that they're perceived that they are? And what gets done and accomplished while it's all being appealed of the things that the administration does that can't be reversed, and what's the impact not just on the actual consequences, but on the fact that this is how they're doing it. And so we try to talk about things like that. And so the process is really important to me. And I would think, Denny, it's probably accurate to say the process is less important to you than the actual things that are getting done. And so it's like, we're observing that. It's not like one's right or wrong, and we're not going to affect the policy, and nobody in the government is going to listen to us anyway. So there's no point in my proving myself the better thinker or more correct. It's more, how do we keep talking about it? Because it's the conversation that keeps going that's more important than being right about something, or that my way of thinking about it is better. And also, I'm not a businessman. My family weren't business people. Denny's a business person, so he comes in from really different things I know nothing about. And it's like, that's really interesting to hear about.
Yeah. Let me take that. So you make a postulate. From the simple perspective that Denny would take is, you're proposing something that my natural reaction would be, I don't think that's necessarily true. But you raise it up. So there's two things I'd just like to highlight. One is that you're just putting forth a potential interesting question that is a legitimate question. There's nothing about whether it's right, wrong, and different at the moment. It's just, I have a question about this, and I wonder, and I think, per se. Now, Denny, you hear that. When you hear a statement that on the surface, generally we would say, well, that's not true. How do you receive that in a healthy way and say, well, I'm willing to go further with that, and honor that, hey, that's a legitimate question. Let's go. Talk about how do you receive that, and how do you are willing to go forward with that.
I respond to that when it comes from Jonathan differently than the way I respond in any other part of my life. And there's a reason, I think. First of all, we talked about the relationship we have, but it's not just that. We have agreed to do a process here. And we have, over time, there's not a written set of rules, but it's become an accepted part of how we do this, that I won't have that reaction, even though it's my gut instinct to have that reaction. Rather, I will honor Jonathan's question and put some time into how I respond to it. And I think it's because we've entered into this agreement, this covenant sort of, that we'll honor each other through a process that we've agreed to do. And this does not take a small amount of time. We are together usually 3 hours once a month. And I don't know how many hours in preparation for that 3 hours. It's somewhat exhausting, but because we've agreed to do this, I feel an obligation to be as honorable as I can. And I don't pull it off anywhere near as well as he does. He is much more likely to say, I have never thought about that issue this way, the way you're saying. That's very interesting. I have to really work my way to that place.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And do you work? Go ahead, Jonathan.
I would say it differently, is we have a really hard time getting off of Zoom. Our spouses don't want to have anything to do with it, and they just go as far away as they can. But I would say we have such a good time doing it
Yeah.
that it's not like it's a duty that we have to go to the very bitter end. It's like we can't get off Zoom.
Yeah. We schedule, Zoom cuts you off after an hour. So we schedule an hour. We get to the last 1 minute warning. We say, let's just get back on and we can close it up and schedule next time. Next thing you know, we're at the end of the second hour.
Yeah. Now, do you, again, what seems like you've learned something, and this is helpful, I think, is that, Jonathan started with that example, what Trump's doing is unconstitutional. So if you make that statement, what Trump is doing is unconstitutional, which you could believe because of the news sources that he has, there's really nowhere to go with that per se. So it sounds like you two, and that could be Jonathan's thought is, I wonder if some of the stuff he's doing is unconstitutional, but it sounds like you go one step deeper and say, okay, what exactly is your question that we could discuss to get underneath the news sources and start to evaluate some things? Because you can find out, and we'll talk about this at this next session about how do you discover information that at least has some veracity to it. But it sounds like you two work at the question, and that helps you set up your process.
And one of the things that Denny will do is he'll say that it's not different from other presidents, that it's just a political thing to single this one out, but that everybody has done things like that to one extent or another. And I'll come back and say, well, that's true. This is of a different level it's a different quality. It's pushing things farther. And so sometimes we'll just leave it and go on because there's always something more to talk about, but that we don't fight to the end to say we have to, you have to be defeated. You have to agree with what I'm saying. Sometimes we just move on because we can't resolve it, but it raises the questions about how accurate is the media and how can reasonable, thoughtful people come to such different conclusions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was I would come to the meetings when we have our meetings with my 3 or 4 top items, and I would think through those, and we'd never get through my 3 or 4 items. We'd get through the one, maybe a second, and other things would come up along the way. Jonathan might send me a note that's got a long list of things that are driving him crazy. And I would choose, given that we approach it differently, I might say, all right, I can't answer all those. He's got a long list there. And some of them feel like themes to me. Some of them feel like unrelated. I'm going to pick the one that I maybe am the most interested in, and I'll respond to that. And I might send him a text back and say, and give him some thoughts and things, and we'll talk about that when we're together. And then maybe a week later, I get another list from him, and it's still got some of the original items on it. And this would go on for week after week. And I'd notice there's some things he's not going to let up until I finally deal with them, like the terminations of prosecutors, which just drives him absolutely crazy. And I think, well, gosh, every president's just wholesale replacing people all the time. But I couldn't excuse it any longer because it was clearly something that he just really wants to talk about. So I would decide, even though it's not on that one, it's not interesting to me necessarily, but it's driving him crazy. So I would put the work in to get ready for that. And I did the last time I think we were together. And now we're doing back and forths on it, but we signal each other what tends to be really important, and eventually we'll get to them.
How can this not be important to you? How can this not be important to you?
Right.
And, they're not all political. We have disagreements over Israel. We have disagreements over religion itself.
Testosterone in military.
There you go. Testosterone in the military was a big one the last time. Transgender.
Show me the evidence that it makes a difference.
Yeah.
Show me the evidence.
Are there more than 2 genders from a biology standpoint or from a genetic standpoint? I mean, crazy stuff that we'll get into.
Don't get me started.
But even on those where the principles are that he may be in a place where the principle is some of them are offensive to me, right? As a Christian now, and yet I won't go there. I will entertain it. And I'll even entertain the possibility that I have some science wrong. I have to, because that's what we've agreed to do.
Yeah. Well, thanks for both of you. We're at the end of our time to at least set up the premise here of, what you process stuff, which is, first of all, love, which is honor and respect. 2, you're working toward framing up the right questions. And then we're willing to go deeper, which we'll talk about next time, about into other places to get information and not just rely on the biased information that we both, you both tend to drift into in terms of who you follow generally, but you're willing to open that up. And we'll talk more about that, the process, next time. So thank you both for doing it. Jonathan, it's a pleasure to meet you. Are you in Boston right now? Is that where you live, in Boston?
Yes.
Yeah. Where do you live in Boston area?
So Lexington.
Lexington. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. That's a beautiful place. So thank you so much. And hey, listeners, we know this is a little bit different than you normally hear, but if you have questions and would like to have us understand certain things, send it in to questions@abideministry.com, and we'd love to get back to you. So we'll pick up. We have another session coming with Jonathan, Denny. So tune in, next week. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.